Hello, you're watching Tell It Like It Is, and my name is Kathy Benuck. My guest today is not only one of those people known for telling it like it is, but he's also one of those people who doesn't just talk, but who brings people together to get something done. And that is Hanover resident Jim Rubens. Now, if his name sounds particularly familiar to you these days, it's really because he served as chairman of the Granite State Coalition Against Expanded Gambling, which, as you know, was very successful this year in defeating this year's casino bill, which was very much a part of Governor Maggie Hassan's budget. And it's really kind of amazing when you think that it was defeated in the House by 57 votes. Very notable because of the fact that it was Maggie's Democratic Party that was in control of the House this year. Jim has had a very long involvement in New Hampshire politics. From 1994 to 1998, he served in the New Hampshire Senate, and while there, he chaired both the Senate Public Affairs Committee as well as the Senate Education Committee. Now, as a senator, he was very active. He both authored and led the effort to pass both the state's charter school law as well as the state's victim restitution law. He led the fight to pass the SB2 all-day voting options for towns and school districts, and since then that really has wound up being adopted by just about all of the localities throughout the state. He authored and led the charge for the passage of legislation to end teacher tenure, which a lot of people followed that one, and also to require basic competency testing for new teachers. Both bills did pass the House, did pass the Senate, but guess what? Then Governor Jeanne Shaheen vetoed both of them. He wrote and organized support for a full school voucher law, and that did pass the House. It also passed the Senate. Unfortunately, not in the same year, though, but we did see a revival of that later. He chaired the Higher Education Study Commission, and among the work that was accomplished there was the launching of what is today's ability for students in our state's community colleges to be able to take their credits from community college and get them applied to the state's university and state college here in New Hampshire. And this obviously has been phenomenal because it's allowed an awful lot of people to get four-year degrees because it's made it easier for that to happen, more accessible, more affordable. So it's been quite a service to an awful lot of young people here in the state. Jim also launched the debate for the eventual deregulation of electric utility companies' energy generation, and I wouldn't be surprised if maybe he brings that up today. Jim's political involvement didn't end with his service as a state senator. To the contrary, in 1993, he served as chairman of the Platform Committee of the National Independence Party. In 1998, he was a candidate in the race for New Hampshire governor, and he did indeed receive the endorsement of the New Hampshire Union leader, which of course is pretty major in politics in this state. He came within 2,700 votes of winning the nomination, despite being outspent by his opponent 4-1. Amazing. In 2000, he served as chairman of the Platform Committee of the New Hampshire Republican Party, and in 2002, he served as both spokesman and senior policy advisor to U.S. Senator Gordon Humphrey when he decided that he would run for governor in New Hampshire. Now, Jim is a business entrepreneur, and he's founded over a dozen new companies. Today, he's an angel investor with the Granite State Angels, and that's a group which focuses on providing funding for businesses involved in proprietary technology as well as in healthcare solutions. He's also a consultant on clean energy policies with the Union of Concerned Scientists, a very prestigious organization based, I think, still out of Cambridge, Mass. And he's also a book author. I guess that was in his spare time. A book that was actually favorably reviewed by Time magazine. And the title of that is so intriguing that I really want to get a copy and read it now. The title is Over Success, Healing the American Obsession with Wealth, Fame, Power, and Perfection. As I said, I want to read that now. He resides in Hanover, as I mentioned before, with his wife and his son. He's a graduate of Wilbraham, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, is in Massachusetts native Academy in Wilbraham, Mass., where he was recognized for his achievements in geometry and debating. And he also attended Dartmouth University, where he was a chemistry major. So you can see that he's pretty well versed in a whole bunch of different subjects. So we're going to have a fascinating conversation, and you will hear that he doesn't just talk the talk, but he walks the walk. Jim, I'm glad to see you.
Kathy,
thanks for being here.
You're going to put the audience to sleep, but I really appreciate all that.
Well, you've had quite a life. I mean, and I think I'm just touching on a few things that you've done.
Thank you very much.
Oh, no, that's amazing. Yeah. Well, you know, as a state senator, you certainly spent a lot of time working on educational issues and worked very hard to get some important things passed. And I can't help but ask you right now about an issue that is really in the forefront these days, not only in New Hampshire, but all over the country. And we actually just did two shows on it, and that's the whole Common Core. And I don't know if that's something you've been following or not, because it is going to be implemented in New Hampshire, and it's one of those top-down things that the feds have decided is the panacea for everything educational. And I guess, I mean, one of the major reasons that we're seeing so much opposition throughout the country is the lack of any legislative involvement in the implementation or acceptance of it in the states, including New Hampshire. So is that something that, you know, you have some thoughts on?
Yeah, briefly, when I get involved in politics, when I was in the state Senate chair of the Education Committee, we had Goals 2000. It was from the federal government. They were going to fix the difficulties of the American education system.
They're always going to fix something, aren't they?
And then there became standard-based education, which came in the 1990s, later in the 1990s and the 2000s, and that was going to bring more uniformity and higher quality to education. Now we have Common Core, and there's a commonality to all these three things: Goals 2000, standards, and Common Core. It comes in from the federal government. It's one size fits all. And it's going to fix the problems of public education, which needs to get better. And the problem with that, from my point of view, is that it doesn't take account of the fact that there are excellent teachers who need space and room to practice their craft. We need to recognize excellent teachers. We need to give them space to do what they do well, to flourish. And we need to allow parents, particularly lower income and middle income parents, the same options for education that wealthier parents have. So that's why I worked on and passed the charter school law. That's why we should have options for parents in education. And I think that's a better model, because we're America. We're different than other countries. We're a place where individuals find their own path and achieve excellence on their own path, and we need that kind of options to drive quality in education, because a school that's good for one child or in one family might not be the same school that's great for another child. You may live in a community, as I do, with very good schools. Hanover has good schools, but they're not the best possible school for every child that lives in the community. So my model would be allow options, allow parents to have options, allow schools to multiply in types and diversity.
And of course, one of the problems that we keep hearing about Common Core is how it's robbing more and more local decision making on education.
It's the other direction. It's the top-down, one-size-fits-all direction. And if the federal government had all the answers, I think people would be more excited about Common Core than they are.
So, aren't we finding out, though? They don't seem to have too many good answers on anything.
Well, they read my emails, but I don't know if they have all the answers in public education.
Really?
Yeah. So I wish they would fully fund special education. That would be something the federal government could work on, and to great effect and to great benefit to local communities.
Well, it's certainly going to be intriguing to see how this rolls out in New Hampshire, because as more and more people are hearing about it, and local school boards are finally starting to understand it, we're starting to see some pushback. So it'll be very intriguing to see how it all shakes out. And you know, fascinatingly enough, the state Board of Education can't really tell us what the standards are that they've established, and they can't tell us what the cost is going to be. And I mean, obviously it is going to be costly. There's no getting around that. So now I know an extremely big concern of yours is the cost of health care in the United States, And of course, we all know that it's almost twice of that of other industrial nations, yet, you know, our results are average at best,
Right. Yeah.
with both health status and income. You've also expressed a lot of concern over the fiscal stability for both Medicare and Social Security. Now, I did notice through reading a lot of your literature that you have 4 ideas to reduce healthcare costs and to stabilize Medicare. And can we kind of like maybe talk about each of the 4?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, the bottom line is we have programs that people are depending on, Social Security, Medicare, and these programs are not stable right now. The trustees of the actuarial trustees of Medicare and Social Security have come forth with a new prognostication 3 weeks ago, $50 trillion underwater. In other words, the programs that people are depending on are not funded. So, 2 approaches. You could raise taxes into the stratosphere to fund them. The American public does not want that. It's not tolerable. It would collapse our economy. The other approach is to take account of what you mentioned earlier. Our healthcare costs in the United States are twice that of the industrial competitors. In other words, the leading economies of the world. We're twice the cost per person as those economies, and our results are about average. So we're not getting our money's worth. So I'm proposing a number of things, and all 4 of them I'll highlight, that we can do to reduce the cost of healthcare. And doing that, we can make Medicare more sustainable. We can make sure that people can rely upon it. And if you'll notice, this issue is the 3rd rail of American politics.
Yeah.
Politicians are not allowed to talk about it, because what you do is when you talk about it, you'll be subjected to TV ads. I probably will.
Claiming you're trying to get rid of it.
Pushing someone in a wheelchair over a cliff.
Yep.
We've seen these ads.
Yep.
If we're not allowed as political candidates and political leaders to talk about the issue, it's not going to get solved. And it's not going to go away by itself. Again, it's $50 trillion underwater in the hole. So I'm proposing 4 things so people can get a sense of what we could do. And I believe the American public, if we had a calm, careful discussion of these things, would accept these things. We need to means test Social Security and Medicare. What does means testing mean? It means that Warren Buffett and Bill Gates don't need to force young people who are working and having a difficult time paying off their college education, paying for their car payments, paying for gasoline. Those folks don't need to pay for Medicare for Bill Gates.
You're absolutely right.
So it just makes sense. Number 2, we need to, and Republicans typically filibuster this when it comes before Congress, we need to allow the federal government to negotiate the prices of pharmaceuticals. Our federal government spends about $80 billion a year on pharmaceuticals. We pay the highest prices in the world.
Horrible.
Our federal government is the largest buyer of pharmaceuticals in the world. So I would like to see our federal government use its buying power on behalf of Medicare and Medicaid beneficiaries, use that buying power to bring our pharmaceutical costs down to the point, and we could save tens of billions of dollars per year that way. I know the pharmaceutical industry, it has 1,500...
I was just about to ask you that. Is that the major reason we don't see change?
I think it is.
Because they do spend a tremendous amount of lobbying money.
They spend $250 million per year lobbying the White House and Congress. They have 1,500 lobbyists working full-time. And we need to be acting in the interest of the American public and sustaining these programs that people depend upon. So there's an idea. Number 2, negotiate the price of pharmaceuticals, bring the cost down. Number 3, defensive.
That could be a huge savings by itself.
It's somewhere between $20 and $40 billion a year we could potentially save. That would allow these programs to do what they need to do, to help people that are depending on them, to make them sustainable for younger people so that they could plan on them. Idea number 3. We have a lot of defensive medicine in the United States.
Yeah, tell people what that is.
What is defensive medicine? It's hospitals and doctors doing things for you and to you, giving you tests, giving you surgery, giving you medications in order to avoid lawsuits. Now, the things that are being done in defensive medicine don't help you. They add cost to the healthcare system, and sometimes when you get more drugs that you don't need and more surgeries and tests that you don't need, hurt you. So we need to ward off defensive medicine. How do we do that? And that's between 4 and 9% of the cost of American health care That's $2.7 trillion a year we spend in healthcare in the U.S. 4 to 9% of that is defensive medicine. So we can reduce those costs in a couple of ways. We could use the British system of loser pays on these lawsuits, so it would reduce the extent of there being frivolous lawsuits that drive.
Now, loser pays.
Loser pays is what they do in Great Britain. So if you lose litigation, you pay the litigation costs. In other words, you pay for the lawyer.
For the doctor?
For the person who defended themselves and prevailed in the lawsuit.
Really?
Right. So it tends to suppress litigation. That's one idea. There are pluses and minuses to that. Another idea is to create something called safe harbors. It's very carefully crafted standards of practice that are used. If you do, for example, knee surgery, you check very, very carefully that the knee to be surgery applied to that knee, that you mark it with an X, and that you have it double checked before someone comes in. That's a standard of practice that could be applied across the United States to make sure you don't have surgery on the wrong knee. And that set of practices for each type of medical service would provide a safe harbor, a protection against lawsuits. It would be a more difficult time proving that a doctor did the job if they use those safe harbor practices. So that's a third thing that we can do.
Now let me throw in a quick question on that.
Right.
Now we talked for a second, or you talked for a second about big pharma having such a lobbyist presence and the amount of money they speak. And we all know that we're inundated with ads on television for new prescription drugs and such. And, you know, a lot of these drugs are presented that take this and you're cured. So, and and they'll always say, ask your doctor, you know. So I suspect a whole lot of people are going to their doctor's offices saying, well, why aren't I getting whatever? Do you think that doctors are responding to this as well? And this is kind of pushing those costs up? It
is.
Because the new drugs are always hideously expensive.
Some of them are expensive. My wife's mother, my mother-in-law, was being taken care of in Maine. We found, I won't use her name, but we found that she was on 10 medications. She was pushing her 911 button. An ambulance would come to the house. About every 2 or 3 weeks, an ambulance would come to the house. She'd be taken to the hospital.
That alone, the cost is huge.
Well, it was about $1,500 to $2,000 a pop. She'd go into the hospital, wait in the emergency room. They would check her out. They'd find nothing was wrong. It was just panic because she does have a particular. She has congestive heart failure, which is not life-threatening, but it creates panic in her. And then she's sent home in an ambulance. No change. She was loaded up with 10 medications. We finally took her out of there. We took her to our house. We brought her to our own hospital and doctor, and we gradually weaned her. 6 of the 10 medications she was on were contraindicated for her condition. So this is an illustration that I learned personally, and this was just last year, in this winter, where our medical system is not optimum. We're not getting the best possible treatment for the people of the United States of America.
And the aggregate cost of all of that,
it's driving up costs.
Huge.
It's tens of thousands of dollars that didn't do anything to help my mother-in-law have better health. And as a matter of fact, it was loading with drugs, with pharmaceuticals that had adverse reaction. So it's an illustration that I see in my own life, spending money that is not helping a person on Medicare. And it can be done better. So another thing we can do is to combat Medicare fraud. Medicare fraud, the Government Accountability Office, this is, if you've ever heard of that Government Accountability Office, they monitor, they're sort of like the watchdog of whether government spends money wisely or not. 10% of all Medicare spending is fraudulently paid by the federal government. Fraud. It's storefront operations where they get a hold of a patient's name. The patient never comes in. They bill Medicaid for a particular service or a drug that is perhaps not dispensed. 10% of all Medicare is fraudulent. We can cut that number down. Credit card companies keep their fraud down to 1%. So that amount of that money is $70 billion per year in Medicare fraud. We can cut that down. So there's some ideas that we can use to sustain these programs that people are depending on. We cannot afford the rate of spending we have right now, and it's at the core of our budget deficit problem, our debt problem in the United States. And politicians and candidates have to feel free to talk about these. I'm talking about them. I'm grabbing the third rail. I'm going to be subjected to television ads about pushing people.
Oh, definitely.
I understand this. The pharmaceutical industry is not going to like what I just said to you. We need to talk about this stuff.
Oh, I totally
Yeah.
agree with you,
Yeah.
and I think you're right that a lot of
Yeah.
politicians won't touch it.
Yeah.
Because they are
We have to.
afraid
We have to.
of the adverse publicity they're going to get
Yeah,
and such.
we're out of time now. The United States is at 105% debt to GDP. This is a wonky number. It's the red zone of the amount of debt that a country has relative to the size of its economy. We're in the red zone right now, and we cannot continue for another 6 years while the incumbent sits in office, racking up this fabulous debt. In 4.5 years the incumbent has been in office, the one I hope to replace. We have racked up $6 trillion of additional federal debt, public debt. We have to talk about the problem. We have to deal with it. The country is going to go over a cliff financially.
And obviously, I would think that you would not in any way, shape, or form think of Obamacare being the answer to any of this.
Well, Obamacare, it makes the medical system more bureaucratic. It's been described recently as Rube Goldberg. We already have the world's most complicated medical care system. It's extremely complicated. As anyone who's ever used it knows. You have your own experience.
Oh, yeah.
It's complicated. And Obamacare makes it more complicated and more bureaucratic, and it drives up the cost. So we're spending about 18% of the entire American economy in healthcare right now, and by 2020 it's going up to 19%. So it takes things in the we need to control the cost of healthcare, and we need to bring the quality up. Cost down, quality up. Those are the goal. Obamacare does not do those things.
Well, I mean, even here in New Hampshire, they're saying, what, another 50,000 people, 50 to 60,000, would be eligible to go on Medicaid. And many of these people don't need Medicaid. They already have health insurance. They'll be giving up their health insurance to instead go on the taxpayer-funded program.
Yeah, we've seen what happened in Maine, a very similar, Maine adopted a program very much like this. And what we saw, almost in every case, we saw people coming off employer-provided health insurance or their own health insurance and going on to state-subsidized insurance. So you're not increasing the number of people. This is what they found in Maine. You're not increasing the number of people having health care.
That's what I understand.
And having access to health care. You're just shifting the cost from the private sector to the public sector. Now, it doesn't mean there's not a problem, but that particular, the other problem with this is you hear the other party, I'm a Republican of course, saying that if we adopt this in New Hampshire, we're going to get a flood of free money from the federal government. Now, we have to remember, all of the money for this program, this is hard news, all of it is being printed. The Federal Reserve Board is printing the money. It's not being paid for. Taxes, and the Chinese are not loaning America money anymore. They're liquidating their bond holdings. It's quite irresponsible to say this money will always be flowing from the federal government when this printing of money is absolutely unsustainable. You can't have an economy with 105% debt to GDP and then assert that the federal government will keep printing money ad infinitum like this. The bond market will collapse. So we need to be thinking about the ability of the federal government to follow through on the promise to pay for this.
And this is what the critics have said all along.
It's rather obvious.
Yeah.
And
we have state government.
It doesn't mean there's not a problem.
Direction.
It doesn't
no,
mean
I think we all can agree there are a problem.
Right.
But I don't think we all can agree on what is being presented as the solutions.
Printing money is not the solution.
No, it isn't. It is not. Now, I know that again, as part of all this, you certainly are very vocal about the rapidly escalating and unsustainable national debt. And I do know that you do or would very much push for the simplifying of the tax code and believe that their payroll and corporate tax rates need some changes. So why don't you kind of talk about that, what specific changes you think are needed and what will be accomplished with some of those changes?
We have a jobs crisis in the U.S.
We do,
and I think
indeed.
that's what the tax changes need to address. We have printed the $6 trillion of additional money in 4.5 years, and we have the same percentage of Americans, adults, working that we did at the bottom of the 2009 Great Recession. In other words, the percentage of American adults who are working in the workforce has not changed since 2009. We've printed a vast amount of money. We see the unemployment rate going down. We've barely kept up with population growth in the United States. Young people cannot get jobs. coming out of college, they can't get jobs up to their skill and training level. People who've been laid off have been laid off sometimes for months. They can't get back into the workforce again because of, frankly, age discrimination. People my age and younger. We have a jobs crisis in the United States of America. We're now in a world, we're in a borderless world, we're in a borderless economy around the world. We compete with other countries. The other industrial nations have corporate tax codes which are more advantageous to job formation than the American tax code. It's too complicated. It's riddled with loopholes. We've seen the news about companies like Apple and General Electric paying essentially no taxes. Now, the problem with this is it has forced jobs offshore. So I'm proposing we take the corporate tax code, simplify it, reduce the rate of the corporate tax code, and then we have $2.1 trillion of corporate profits, American headquartered multinationals, trapped offshore by the 35% book tax rate.
Okay.
So I'm proposing we repatriate a good part of the $2.1 trillion, private sector stimulus, reduce the tax rate on that money, bring it back to the United States, pay dividends, build factories, hire people to work in the United States of America, and again, simplify the tax code, reduce the rate, make us more competitive with the industrial nations against whom we compete in Europe and Asia, in order to bring the jobs home. And we need to make these cuts permanent, so that companies can plan ahead for a decade or two. That's the time it takes to recover the cost of building a factory here. We need a stable, simple, lower rate tax code, and we ought to do the same thing with the personal tax code. These are big lifts, but I believe Congress could do this. I believe there's an appetite. It hasn't been done. We've been talking about it for decades. Congress is stalemated.
That's what's so frustrating.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, we see so much get stalemated.
Right. Yeah.
And even though the needs continue to expand,
right,
we're just not seeing them do the job.
The number of unaddressed issues in America is phenomenal. We have, to be frank, we have a bought and paid for Congress. I'm just going to come out and say it. If you talk with most Americans, they understand Congress is like Gulliver. It's very powerful and big, but they're strapped down to the ground and immobilized by the interest groups with the tens of thousands of lobbyists that won't yield an inch on their particular point of view. And we need more people in office willing to be advocates for the well-being of the United States of America. And I think that's the only way we're going to break gridlock, because if Congress and people in the U.S. Senate and people in the House were free to advocate on behalf of the betterment of the United States of America, we would see people doing things like simplifying the corporate tax code, like cutting the cost of health care, like cutting fraud in Medicare. We'd see these things happening because we know they have to be done.
That's quite a visual of Congress being strapped down to the ground.
It's but
really
you can
is.
see it. We know the number of things that need to be done in the United States of America, and we know that they're not being done.
And they're not being done.
And they're not being done.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
When I was introducing you, I know that another big concern of yours is energy issues.
Yeah.
And of course you do consult with the Union of Concerned Scientists.
Oh, I did until I had to resign that job a few months ago when I began doing this. Yeah.
And
I'm working on this particular project
obviously you were involved in the whole deregulation argument here in New Hampshire.
Yep.
Where's all that going? What are the big, huge needs there?
Yeah. Energy is a major enterprise in the United States.
Yeah.
My vision for energy in the United States is two parts. Number one, let the marketplace decide between all the forms of energy that we have available. The clean sources, the fossil fuel sources. Put everything into the cost of energy. Make sure that people who are buying energy have an all-in price. Now, this is what gets controversial for me as a Republican. All-in price means that the cost of coal-fired power should include the cost of asthma caused by coal-fired power plants. This is extremely controversial as a Republican for me to say this. I'm being honest about the debt and the deficit crisis. I need to be honest about energy sources. We have a carbon dioxide problem. We have climate change. This is very controversial for me to say as a Republican. It's incontrovertible science. We need to put the price of climate change, this wacky weather we've seen in New Hampshire over the past several years, these incredible precipitation events that are washing out roads and highways. It's linked to climate change. It's costing us money. It's driving up our insurance rates. I'd like to see get rid of all the subsidies, get rid of all the complicated tax code and energy, put all the costs of energy in the various forms of energy, and let the market decide between the various forms of energy.
Are you getting pushback from leaders in the Republican Party?
I am getting people listening to this. There are polls, amazingly, you don't hear this on Fox News, but that about 2/3 of conservative, self-described conservative Republicans believe that there is climate change, believe it's caused by human beings, and believe we ought to do something about it. What we ought to do is something, strip away the tax code complexities. Think, for example, of ethanol. We put it, 10% in our gas, we put it in our tanks. It reduces our gas mileage. It's driving up the cost of food all over the world.
Yeah.
It's a failed policy. It's a perfect example of the federal government with its wacky, lobbyist-controlled special interest perks in the tax code and manipulating the various forms of energy. So we have ethanol driving up food prices. It doesn't work. Okay? Take away all of that complexity, simplify the energy market, put the cost of pollution into the price of energy. The consumer will decide which is the best, whether it be nuclear or wind or offshore wind or pellets in your wood stove. We can produce pellet heat right here in New Hampshire. We do it very well.
Pellet stove.
You have a pellet stove?
Yeah,
I do too,
we
in my house.
Yeah.
And I can produce pellet heat in my house, and I can buy pellets that are produced in the United States of America and in New Hampshire, and I can heat my house for about half the price of oil.
Yeah.
And there's
Our house is an all-electric house. So if we didn't use pellets, I don't even want to think what our electric bill would be, because it's already pretty awful.
Yeah, and but we don't need the federal government to tell us to use pellet heat. We just need the federal government to put the full cost of the impact of oil into the cost of the oil we buy to heat our house, and some of those costs include things like defending the Persian Gulf. Now, there have been various estimates. What does it cost the United States to defend the Persian Gulf, to keep oil shipping lanes open so the United States of America economy doesn't get tanked by OPEC or these crazy wars over there? There is a cost in the tens of billions of dollars a year to defend that shipping lane. That should be in the cost of the oil. And then the consumer can know, should I buy oil or pellets made here in the United States? And the pellets made here in New Hampshire have no political risk. We don't need. We have to defend I-93 so that a truck, a logging company, can take low-grade timber and bring it to the pellet mill. That is something we like doing in New Hampshire. We like keeping I-93 in good condition.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
Because it serves us all.
Yeah.
So again, my theory on and my proposal on energy, all in cost, so that the consumer knows the cost, take away all the wacky tax subsidies, let the different forms of energy duke it out in the marketplace, and let the best, cleanest form of energy win. And what we'll do is we'll see the United States driving energy technology, and we're falling behind China now. It's not good. China is outspending us on core basic R&D, on batteries, high voltage transmission, offshore wind, solar. We can't do this. We are the leader in the world in biotechnology because we've committed to being the leader in biotech. It creates enormous benefits to us right here in New England and New Hampshire, where there are biotech companies here in the state. We need to have that same attitude toward innovative, clean, leading-edge energy technology.
Do you think we need to be more involved in outer continental shelf oil development?
That is a controversial question. I don't think that people in New England want that. It should remain a state-by-state question. I don't think people in New Hampshire want drilling off the coast of New Hampshire. I think people in New Hampshire, if they wanted to, would be better served, in my own opinion, by fostering the development through accelerated R&D at the federal level. Now, remember, the federal government did the early stage R&D on fracking and directional drilling. In other words, we're having a gas boom, a natural gas boom in the United States right now. So we're benefiting greatly by having low-cost natural gas. Remember that the federal government, through early stage R&D, perfected the technology that led to this shale gas boom we're having in the United States. We should be doing the same thing with deep offshore wind. These are floating windmills that are far offshore. We have among the very finest offshore wind resources in the entire world, between Newfoundland, Canada, down to about Delaware. and it's offshore, deep enough you can't see the windmills. They float. The technology is emerging. They're still high cost, but the resource theoretically is big enough to power the electricity needs of the entire United States of America. Now, we're not going to...
Serious?
That's how much, and it's 24/7 wind. It's not the intermittent stuff we get onshore. You can't see the windmills. They're deep offshore. The wind blows all the time. It's powerful. The technology is emerging. Maine is moving ahead. Maine is doing a demonstration project for a floating turbine off the coast of Maine. The Northeast U.S. would be the OPEC of wind in the United States if we were to, in the United States, foster the emergence of cost-effective technology there. So there is a role for the federal government in early stage, not Solyndra, pre-commercial, perfecting the technology, then let the marketplace take, as the marketplace did with fracking and directional drilling for natural gas. You let the marketplace take over, and the energy problems in America would be resolved within 2 to 4 decades.
Now, you did run into, when you were working in New Hampshire on deregulation, you ran into a fair amount of local lobbying opposition, did you not?
Well, there was I put in a bill when I was in the state Senate to deregulate electric utilities. What that means is you allow the consumer to choose where they buy electrons, and you retain the monopoly on the wires. So, for example, if you're a public service company of New Hampshire customers, you will pay Public Service Company of New Hampshire for the cost of maintaining the wires and the transmission facilities and the billing services. But you can choose your electrons from any number of suppliers, and we see in New Hampshire consumers 95 out of 100 commercial companies have selected different companies than Public Service Company of New Hampshire to buy their electrons because the cost is lower. And now residential consumers in New Hampshire are doing the same thing. So I did launch that process of that deregulation. What I opposed is the bailout of Public Service Company of New Hampshire. If you look on your PSNH bill, you'll see a line that says stranded costs. I fought that when I was in the state Senate. The number is too high.
Now, stranded cost stands for what?
It stands for, when we went into deregulation, this gets technical and nerdy.
I bet a lot of people don't know what it is, though.
Well, you look on your bill and you'll see it. If you have a monthly bill from PSNH, look at your stranded cost line. I fought that line on your bill for 2 years. When I left the state Senate, Jeanne Shaheen, then governor, agreed with PSNH, put the $2 billion, put it on your bill, let the ratepayer pay it. Ratepayers have been paying it for 14 years now.
14 years?
14 years. It's still not paid off. $2 billion. What it does is it pays PSNH for its power plants that it divested that were worth less than, in the market, worth less than the ratepayers were paying at the time they were divested. Gets a little complicated, but the fight was between what the Public Utilities Commission thought those plants were worth, which was about half of what PSNH wanted and got. I fought that. I don't like corporate welfare very much.
So was that all done through rule promulgation?
It was done through litigation. PSNH litigated against the state for 3 years, and I believe the state would have been better served to go into court, litigate it, and our Public Utilities Commission estimated the value of those stranded costs at almost half of what PSNH wanted. We should have fought it, and and I think we would have prevailed in court. And the evidence amassed by our Public Utilities Commission was good. Again, Governor Shaheen at the time capitulated, and again, I'm not cotton to corporate welfare, and that's all it was.
What was her excuse for capitulating?
I have to ask you to ask her that question.
Wow.
Yeah.
And we're still paying 14 years.
Well, what they say is that we can't be subjected to litigation. I say litigate. Let's find out what the court would say the plants are worth. And if it turns out that PSNH was correct and we had to pay the full $2 billion, well, at least we tried. We don't want to fold our cards, fold up our tent before we even press our case. That's what didn't make sense to me.
How many more years are we going to be paying that?
I can't tell you, but it's still
there.
Nobody
knows, really?
Well, people do. You can call the Public Utilities Commission and find out, but you've been paying for 14 years if you're a PSNH customer.
It's going to keep going on for a while.
And it keeps your electric rates higher than they would have otherwise have been. Yeah.
You know, some of these issues are complicated enough.
They are complicated.
But I think the average voter, as all of these things are swirling in Concord, and in state offices and in the State House and such, I think sometimes people, their brains just get so full and they're like, I have no idea what they're all talking about, and they start tuning out.
The job of an elected official and a candidate like myself is to try to understand this stuff, spend a lot of time understanding it, and then almost always, in fact, almost always, this stuff can be explained to people. If you understand it carefully enough and explain it carefully enough, the public can understand this stuff, reach conclusions, and provide feedback to elected officials.
Well, I don't think we're getting enough of that, do you?
We're not. The distance, we have a trust deficit between Congress and the public, and the trust deficit.
Oh, absolutely.
It's as big as the national budget deficit. The trust deficit. You talk to I've been talking with people for the last month since I've been in this exploratory campaign, and the lack of trust in the federal government is as deep as a cavern.
I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you.
So these complicated
100%
issues
right.
have to be explained to the public, and the public has to be trusted to understand them. And the public is, one of your responsibilities as a citizen, United States citizen, is to understand this stuff to the best of your ability and provide feedback to your elected representative. Tell them what you think ought to be done on these issues. It's our duty as public, as members of the public, to understand one or more of these issues. Become specialist as a citizen, and constantly communicate with your elected officials.
I don't think enough people do that.
More people need to do it.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. They need to tell it like
more
it is,
people
as
would,
the mantra is around this place.
More people would do it if they thought that Congress wasn't bought and paid for.
Yeah.
If the public thought that people in office were actually listening to them, I think more members of the public would rise to this occasion and become public experts. They would become volunteer experts, and the people who are in whatever industry or trade would become a political expert in their industry and trade, and would voluntarily provide high quality information to their congressperson, their U.S. senator, and the senator would listen. And if the senator were not roped down by special interests and special interest money in politics, they would listen more, and the public would again, rise to the occasion and provide more of this high quality information.
And it seems to happen very fast. I mean, a lot of people talk a great game when they're running, but things change so quickly once they're elected.
When you get there, you are subjected to the fundraising process. The average U.S. senator spends a third to half their time dialing for dollars.
Yeah.
And where do you dial for dollars? You dial for dollars from the people who write the legislation that you're going to vote on.
Yep.
It's a sick, sorry system, and it's why there's a trust deficit, and this has got to change.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. Totally.
I don't want to be too alarmist. I'm trying to remain calm, but I think all the public knows
this. Yeah, but sometimes it's hard to stay calm when you see all the chaos going on around you, really.
Yeah.
Now, I know you've pointed, right here in New Hampshire, within the Republican Party.
Yeah.
Of course, we all know, whether we're Republicans or Democrats or whatever we may be, we all are aware that the Republican Party has had some problems over the past couple of years, is the best way to put it. And you have very openly pointed to the need for more women and for more young people to actively get involved in the process, the Republican process. And you've indicated that you have the skill set to help bring that about. What can you do to make that happen?
First of all, our party is the better party. Okay. What do we believe in? What do Republicans? We believe in personal responsibility, in freedom, in personal opportunity. These are things at the very core of what has made America the best country in the entire history of human beings. And we're the party. Now that we've talked about some of these issues, we're the party of fiscal sanity. Almost all Americans believe in the federal government being able to pay for what it promises to pay for, in having budgets that are sustainable over the long term. So what I'm proposing to Republicans is, let's get our act together. And we have libertarian Republicans, we have moderate Republicans, we have constitutional Republicans, we have conservative Republicans. And all of these different kinds of Republicans believe in those core values I talked about. We need to unite around the huge, pressing problems that are facing America. And why do we need to do that as Republicans? We need to do it to save America. This country is burning down fiscally. We're deep and going deeper in debt. We have a health care system which is bankrupting the country. We need to control the cost and increase the quality of that. We have good ideas in our party. We just simply need to unite around focusing on these issues. And I strongly believe if we talk about the jobs crisis and the debt crisis and the trust crisis, and in addition to that, the constitutional problems, we're seeing the federal government reading my email. I don't like that at all. That's a Fourth Amendment problem. If we talk about this stuff, we're going to bring the different parts of the Republican Party together. We're going to bring young people back in. We're going to bring libertarians back in. We're going to bring women back in. We're going to bring independents back into our party. And then we'll have the number of votes that we need in Congress to fix some of these problems. Talk about what's important to people and then go to work fixing it.
Now, a lot of people would say, and I know you've heard this, we've all heard it,
yeah.
excuse me, that one of the reasons Republicans fared badly in New Hampshire, this past election cycle, was because they didn't rise up in a strong enough fight and let the Democrats define the issues. Do you agree that that happened?
Well, if you look at the television advertising against Republicans in the last two election cycles, the Democrats, it
was pretty brutal.
They were brutal, but they did not talk about the nation's problems.
No, I know.
They talked about Republicans taking away women's contraceptives.
Yes, I know.
Ad after ad, they showed pictures of Republicans pushing Granny in a wheelchair off a cliff.
Yes.
Okay? Republicans, yes, we have to fight back against this, and we have to remind the American public we're here to fix the real problems of America. The Democrats have their negative campaigning. We're here to fix problems. And
I don't think there was enough of a fight, do you?
Republicans have to fight back, but we also have to fight by saying that we're committed to fixing, as I'm repeating myself now, we have to restate again and again and again that we're committed to fixing America's debt problems, our jobs problems, our trust problem. We're going to fix these problems, we're focused on it, and we're going to lay out a roadmap as to how we're going to do it. We're not just going to have rhetoric attacking Democrats, we're going to fight back, but we've got to do a lot more than just say Obamacare is no good and it's evil and awful. We've got to say, how are we going to fix the medical system in the United States of America? We've got to be specific. We've got to grab the third rail and say, America, we're adults. You're adult enough to understand this problem and help us grapple with this issue. We're going to put ideas on the table, and we're asking for your support so we can go to work solving these problems. And we will fight back, yes, against the Democrats' crazy ads. And number two, we're going to fight back by saying we've got solutions to problems.
Well, some of those ads were pretty crazy.
What?
Some of those ads really
were nasty and crazy.
I mean, it was,
they were nasty and crazy, and unfortunately they worked.
Well, now we all know, of course, that next year, in 2014, our sitting New Hampshire U.S. Senator Jeanne Shaheen is up for re-election, and a lot of people do feel as though you are ultimately going to go in the race. At what point do you really have to make your drop-dead decision? I mean, I know you're in an exploratory phase, but at what point do you have to say, okay, I'm in or I'm out, in order to, to put together a campaign and obviously raise the money to run a campaign?
Well, there are rules and regulations associated with that. Right now I'm focused really on just two things. I'm meeting with as many people as possible face-to-face, going to another event in another hour over in New Boston. And I'm talking on the phone. When I'm not meeting with people, I'm talking on the phone. What am I doing? Why am I doing that? Literally full-time. I want to get a sense of where Republicans are and where independents are. What issues are really important, what issues are of concern to people, what's the mood, what will people accept, what won't they accept, the arguments you've heard me make here, do they resonate with Republicans or not? I need to find that out. I think I'm doing pretty well. I'm getting a lot of positive feedback.
You're all over the place, aren't you?
I'm all over the place, but that's my job right now. I've got to figure out how we can put our party together again. That's my job. How are we going to put our party together again? And again, my approach is identify the big problems of America, unite around solving them, be specific about how we're going to solve them in common sense ways that we can explain and bring the American public on board with these solutions.
Now, I would imagine when you were a senator, the fact that you wanted to end teacher tenure would have gotten quite a reaction, because that's kind of like one of those sacred cows out there. Do you think at this stage of the game that you're going to get a lot of negativity or pushback from unions or teachers that are going to try to make everybody remember that they didn't like your position back then?
That'll be up to my opponent to decide, and the various interest groups associated around them. The federal government is not the state. The federal government should not have a major role in local and state education policy.
But they'll bring up state issues.
Now, the federal, they will. They probably will. Yep. But
Yeah,
so I'll say what I feel about education. As I said, right, that was your first question. The federal government ought to fully fund special education. There's this Department of Education with several dozen programs overlapping, most of them unmeasured, most of them not working to help underprivileged kids get ahead in education. Dozens of programs overlapping, most of them not measured as to effectiveness. Billions upon tens of billions of dollars a year spent on this. We have a serious fiscal problem at the federal level. I would prefer to see the federal government block grant the money back to the states and the local school districts. Start by fully funding special education. That's an important thing. The federal government promised to do that, never has. So instead of having 70 overlapping programs for underprivileged kids, most of which don't work, block grant the money back to the states and local school boards. Let them figure it out. They're going to be better than the federal government.
I would think that that would be well received by people.
That's my governing
it would
principle.
seem to me.
Yeah, that's up to the people to decide that. It's my personal philosophy. I believe it's better. It works better. The teacher tenure question you raised. What we do know about education, public education, we know the single most important thing about it is quality teachers in classrooms. There's nothing more important. The size and shape of the classroom, the color of the walls, how many wave upon wave of standards come in from the federal government. What matters is a qualified, committed, passionate teacher in a classroom. And local school boards ought to be doing everything possible to foster hiring and retaining as many of those teachers as possible. And the tenure issue was giving school boards and administrators, your ASAU superintendent, the power to fire an incompetent teacher. And when I brought this bill up, no one thought it could be passed, and I persuaded a superintendent to come in. The first time they'd ever broken the silence, a superintendent came in and described, and it was a shocker, described the process of firing a teacher in New Hampshire, and this was back in the middle 90s. It shocked the legislature.
Really?
It was impossible to hire unless the teacher had actually committed a proven act of child abuse. You couldn't fire a teacher.
Wow.
No matter how incompetent they were.
Wow.
So that sounds inflammatory, but these are not my words. These are the words of a superintendent of a major school district in the state. And so when that information, which I worked very hard to convince someone to do, people would talk off the record to me. I convinced someone to go on the record. That's the political art of getting things done, is to find people.
Well, yeah, you're right about that.
So I won't go into that anymore. That's not the federal government's job. That's the job of the local school district to deal
but
with
of
those
course,
issues.
obviously, when you're a candidate within a state,
It'll come up.
the people who don't like you or who disagree with you or who want to hurt your candidacy will bring up everything.
Right, but if you're concerned about quality education in the classroom, if you're a parent, if you're a school board, I think you're going to take my side on this, because you want the highest quality teacher you can possibly get in your classroom.
Well, nobody should have a job for life, regardless of whether they do it or not.
If they're doing a great job, they should. But if they're not, then they should find another career.
But if they're not doing it, exactly. I mean, we shouldn't be saddled with people.
Right.
I mean, there's really no other, I don't think, industry or profession where that exists, is there?
No, not in the private sector. If you're hired to mow a lawn and the lawn doesn't get mowed, or the lawn is mowed in a sloppy way, you're going to get fired.
Yeah, you're right.
And the customer whose lawn it is going to be happier because the person you hired to mow your lawn fired the person who was doing a lousy job. And if we had tenure in people who mowed lawns, we would have lawns that look like like my lawn. Because I don't mow it enough.
Needs a little help these days too. Yeah. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Well, we are actually coming within our time zone. We have a little over 4 minutes. And I've kind of gone through some of the things that I've heard you talking about and that people are talking about when they talk about you and such. But as with anybody that comes on this show, I don't know everything that they'd like to get across. So you have about 3.5 minutes if you would like to talk to the audience directly and kind of sum up your philosophies and where you think you're going to be headed over the next couple of months, how people can reach you, that kind of thing. Now's a good time to do it.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to talk with any group of voters, Republicans or otherwise, that want to get together and talk issues. I happen to like talking issues, as you might be able to see. And what I'm all about is I'm exploring a run for 2014 U.S. Senate. The incumbent is Jeanne Shaheen, and the issues are the debt, the deficit, the jobs, and the trust crises that are afflicting the United States of America. And we absolutely cannot wait another 6 years, 8 years to deal with these problems. We need a Republican who is going to unite the party and bring these issues to the public with solutions and get to work. If I'm honored enough to be sent to the United States Senate, I will work very, very hard, as I did when I was in the state Senate, and over the past 19 years I've been involved in state politics. Find the way to solve these thorny problems by being committed and dedicated and thoughtful and listening carefully and finding the way to break gridlock. That would be my job, and I'm respectfully asking voters to contact me. JimRubens.com is my website. If you're interested in talking with me, you can call me on the phone, send me an email, and I'll be very accessible.
Now, your website's relatively new, I think, right?
It's about a month old, yeah.
Yeah, so you'll be constantly adding pages to it, no doubt.
I'm adding, it's a brand new.
Yeah, different issues emerge and
I'm
that
shortly
kind of
going to be adding issues to the website, but JimRubens.com is the website, so you can get a
That'll
sense
be
of
on
my
the screen, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, are there any issues you can see that are coming up right now that the average person doesn't have on their wavelength?
Many. We didn't talk about the Fourth Amendment very much. I am extremely disturbed about the fact that the federal government is taking photographs of every letter I send out, reading my emails, reading my Facebook postings, looking at the origin. Now, in East Germany, I'm going to digress into East Germany because the East German Communist government promised the people of East Germany that by having little file cards about every citizen, that we would keep the people of East Germany safer. What happened is they used that to suppress political dissent, suppress political communication, and to make the Communist Party a hegemonic power over the lives of the people in East Germany. Now, many people in government are saying, well, trust us, we have all this information about you, we're not going to use it to suppress political dissent. I say, look at what the IRS has done with information. Our own U.S. Senator has used this information to harass groups, both left and right, that have unpopular political views. This is a serious risk, and I strongly believe... There was just
another breach in the past 24 hours discovered, wasn't there? That over 100,000 Social Security numbers were put up on a website?
That might be a I don't know about that, so I won't talk about it
I guess they
but the
federal as quickly as they could.
The federal government has gone beyond the limits of the Fourth Amendment, and this is a serious, serious problem that needs to be addressed. So with the moments we have left,
we're
stop
almost
there.
We're kind of, don't mind me, I have a little bit of a stiff neck, so if I'm looking a little weird, it's because I'm trying not to shift all the way there. Well, we are right in the second zone now. We'll have you back.
Thank you.
Definitely, as the campaign goes on and so on. And Senator Shaheen has been invited to come on the show. She has an invitation with her people.
I'd be happy.
Haven't heard any answers back yet. If we'll get them,
I'd be happy to do a debate with her
I would
on
love
all these
that.
issues. That'd be fantastic. Instead of waiting for the last, instead of waiting till after the primary, let's get these issues out now. It'll be healthier for the American public to see these issues debated by both sides and to see the different points of view, and it'll make both people better.
And we have hosted a couple of live debates. Tell it like it is. Yes.
Have you? Yeah. So it can be done.
We're
it can be done.
at it now. Yes. Yeah. So we'll give it a shot.
All right.
Thank you for being here. Thank you. Well, that hour certainly flew by, and as you can tell, Jim is a rather compelling person, has a lot of knowledge on a lot of issues, and is going all over the state these days, talking to people, hearing concerns and such, and his information will be on at the end of the show. And you heard him. He'd love to talk to you, so if you'd like to get to know him a little more and so on, do it. I said at the beginning of the show, he's one of the folks who knows how to tell it like it is, but he also puts actions behind his words, and I think you heard that today. So thanks for watching, and hope you'll be back for the next one. Until then, bye-bye.